Okay, welcome Simon. Welcome to the Pause live stream. Really hope that all of you out there enjoyed his amazing documentary that looks at this ski resort that is the epicenter of an outbreak across Europe. And what an amazing, relevant, gripping, harrowing documentary this is. And welcome to Pause, Simon.
Thanks, Rishi.
So I want to start off with how you actually came to understand this story and make this documentary. Give me a bit about the background of where this all came from.
Well, yeah, I mean, we all come from the mountains, so we're just a bunch of friends who kind of grew up snowboarding together, and I don't know, like kind of phased into film, each of us in their own ways, and at some point we ended up shooting another snowboard film 10 years down the line, which is 2 years ago. And in that film, we were already kind of facing questions of environmentalism and like whether or not it's actually a sustainable thing, winter tourism and ski resorts, and especially the way they're run today. And we shot at Ischgl. And so we had,
okay.
So we had a lot of footage,
right?
That's contradiction, yeah. We had this footage, and then obviously Corona happened, and most of us live in Austria. I'm the only one who lives in Germany, but kind of Austria and Germany locked down at pretty much the same point. I think it was somewhere in April, and we were all sitting there and we were like, oh man, like why don't we use the time we have and the footage that we have left to kind of revisit the topic of Ischgl, because we had already kind of touched upon it in contradiction, but very, very lightly only, and really dig a little deeper and kind of not just exploit the facts, because I mean, the facts, like you already said, are kind of harrowing enough in their own right, like how it was run and how this little town ended up becoming such an epicenter of that outbreak. But basically, to kind of take something more away from it and use it as a metaphor for a broader systemic problem of how this is now being dealt with, how people accept the fact that there was mismanagement, how they're going to go about it, and what to take away from that for the future. You know?
And that subtle message, the what I took from it is the importance over consumerism and economy over and above the health of the planet, and individual enjoyment, entertainment, individual lives, individual leisure, as opposed to the health of the public at large. And as people, we should be acting almost in the benefit of everyone around us, whereas this documentary showed that people were really acting in the benefit of themselves and commerce. But, you know, can you expand on that? What was the hidden message behind the sort of meta narrative, the macro narrative of this?
Yeah.
This is, as you say, it's not just a story of one resort poorly managing a virus outbreak. This is a wider narrative that talks to government and people in general, and how countries and how companies have responded to this outbreak. So can you touch on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's an important thing to say here, which I guess the lawyer in our film also stated.
Yeah.
Is that the virus wasn't invented in Ischgl, and really could have been any of these ski towns. There's hundreds of them. Ischgl is just maybe the most far out there one. It's like the Ibiza. It's just this overdrive of what winter tourism is like. So I don't think we try to make a film denying people their pursuit of pleasure or happiness, or saying that there shouldn't be any kind of tourism in the mountains. It's just which kind, and how we deal with the fact that the kind we've been practicing up until now has led us into big problems. And I mean, Corona is just this really fast forward kind of, like almost like a petri dish where everything runs at 10 times the speed. But before Corona came, there was already the very, very big and almost larger scale catastrophe looming of climate change, and just whole microsystems in the mountains eroding through being overexploited. And the fact that the reaction to Corona and responsibilities of how mismanagement is now faced is so similar to how people face the fact that they've been bankrupting nature, the very thing they live off of. I think that's what we really tried to kind of crystallize, especially with the last part of the film, is that there's a similarity here. And since all these happenings of Corona have been so fast and quick, maybe there's an easier way to kind of bring them together and relate them, the cause and the effect, and then the learning from it. Whereas dealing with climate change is a decades-long process, and so it's always very easy to kind of forget about the things that came before. And now you've kind of like had this thing where it's within 1 year, or in the case of Ischgl, it's like half a year almost. You went from the catastrophe to the mismanagement and the outbreak to the aftermath, and now you're facing, in such short time, now you're facing the fact that what are you going to learn from this? How are you going to make sure this doesn't happen again? Frankly, they didn't. like recently, in the last few days, even in the UK, there were really big news articles on BBC, The Guardian. I think there's several in The Guardian now, over how the ski resorts are just pressing to reopen, and they've used the last winter to build new hotels. There wasn't any switch to a more sustainable kind of winter tourism or something that makes sure that we're not so bunched up on each other. It's just they're just really trying to go back to the way things were. Just keep going on that line. I think that's really what we wanted to point out.
And it's interesting because you would hope that globally something like this would force change and catalyze any trends that might have taken 20 years into a really short amount of time. And you've seen that in some cases, but in other cases you just haven't. And I think companies in general, governments can be fairly stubborn with that one line of progress. And it kind of comes to the point of what does it take to force change? If it's not going to be this, what does it actually take to force change? And it's got to be this, right? Because, pandemics, they don't come around too often. So now is an opportunity, right, to force through that change. I want to talk to you a little bit about the timing of filming this, because it's extremely well made and extremely well thought through. But I imagine the pace of it had to be quite quick because it's topical, extremely relevant. You have to jump on the story very fast. So tell me a little bit about the timing. How reactive did you have to be? Did it change some of the filmmaking process for you? How did you manage to squeeze it all in?
I mean, in the end, yeah, it was moving along really quickly, like this whole crisis has. And then on the other hand, also, there wasn't any big sponsor behind this, because that's also, I mean, I guess everybody who makes films kind of can relate to that. The more you kind of try to go into the territory of topics that, let's say, really matter, the harder it becomes to find somebody to pay for it. But so I think there were two constraints there, and I think the major one for us was in timing. Is like, how journalistically accurate will we be? Because at the very beginning, we were really thinking about making this into something that was kind of like where our tone was going to be a lot more neutral than it is now. So we wanted to talk to Mr. Kolber and kind of find his perspective. But then we also thought about talking to victims, talking to Ischgl themselves, and already there we ran into an absolute stonewall with Ischgl and Patsnau, with the local authorities, with hoteliers. We tried calling up a couple people. They all referred us to the tourism bureau. They were like, okay, there's this public relations bureau for the region. We called them. They just flat out shut us down. And so it became very obvious very quickly that if we wanted to make this from all angles, it was going to be very, very long process, and we didn't have that kind of time and the scope. To kind of also money-wise to like really keep going and drag this project along. We knew that at some point this court case was gonna close down, and then the whole narrative would have changed again. And we really wanted to make something current, something for now that isn't so much a film that lives on and always. I think this narrative is going to change, and that's the idea behind it. That when at some point, maybe, hopefully, this court case shuts down, and there is a type of sentencing, then our film will almost be a time document from the moment before that happened.
Yes.
And it's not trying to supervise the whole process simply because we didn't have the scale. So that's how the timing was informed. It's like, okay, we need to get this done. We're choosing this angle now, which is more of an essay, and we're going to state a very clear opinion instead of trying to be super objective. And we're trying to get it out before events run away from us. That court case could take another year or two. And by that time, there's going to be other topics. And we really wanted it now, where ski resorts are about to reopen or not. That whole discussion, it's just now. And I think, like what you just said now, just earlier, if you want to drive change, like when's the time if not now? And you really need to use those small windows of attention that topics get in the bigger dialogue of news media.
Absolutely.
It feels like right now is that window for the winter tourism topic, and in 2 weeks it'll be something else. So we really wanted to get it out now with you guys.
But at the same time, I mean, a piece of film like this is going to be something fairly historical that people will watch in years to come to say, this is how coronavirus was dealt with in different parts of Europe, different parts of the world.
Yeah.
I think that's a super interesting thing about a piece of content like this, that almost it's evergreen, right? It's always going to be relevant, either as a piece of topical content or as a piece of history that people can come back to late in years to come, where they say, this is what happened with this particular ski resort, this is what happened with this particular government. So I think that's super interesting. And I think I like the way you describe it as an essay, because, you know, going back to contradiction, I almost see your previous film almost like a visual essay, as opposed to a narrative one like this is. So how is that style of filmmaking different to you compared to something like that, where it wasn't necessarily bound in time? There wasn't a rush to get something out because there's a court case happening. It was, you know, as I mentioned, it's more of a visual essay. It's the beauty of skiing, it's the beauty of nature. It's much more celebratory about the environment, whereas this points out some of the negative aspects about how people are dealing with things. And you also, as you say, you have to learn a skill of knocking down doors and trying to reach people who don't want to be reached and get under the skin of people who may not want to talk to you. It's a whole new set of skills as a filmmaker to be able to do that. What was that difference like for you?
Yeah, the way you just described it is perfect. It is very different, but I think really, like, the further you dive into the topic of environmental change and where we're at in the world, the less this prevalent dialogue, this positive wall of noise, I think somebody called it, feels adequate. Like the way where everybody's like, especially now with Corona, people just want to hear positive messaging. They want to hear something activating and like a good vision or something. And it feels like the way things are, they're really, really bad. In a lot of ways, they're like, we are almost over 12 o'clock and stuff. And so for us, it was like, we don't just want to make this celebratory content. Also, there's another background that we come from commercials. So we've spent a lot of time doing these positive things. And at some point we were like, no, we just want to call a spade here and really point to how bad this has gone. But if you want to do that, you need to back it up. You really need to back it up. And I think that's the main difference, is that that's why this is why Ischgl is a lot more narrative. It's just because when you call somebody or something out and you really try to point a finger at where something was, or shine a light on something where it was really handled badly, you can't be as sweeping and as broad and as, let's say, impressionistic and as associative as we were with contradiction, where it kind of touches upon these conflicts, but then it always comes back to how beautiful snowboarding is, which is an easy thing to do in a way, narratively. Yes. The challenge there is much more in how you can make it look good, how you're going to make a film that's going to feel fresh to people who have over-consumed outdoor content. That was the big thing with contradiction. With Ischgl, it was more like, this is our first time we want really, that we're really trying to back our narrative up, and we say something that's could lead into a controversy. It's kind of controversial. I think a lot of people who live from the outdoor industry and from the winter tourism are not going to agree. And we really wanted to back it up, and I think that's the main difference. That we really.
Where do you actually see the future? You know, talking about the sort of outdoor alpine ski industry, and given the documentary that you've made, and given what's happening in sort of leisure resorts, where do you see the future of alpine ski industry and generally for hobbyists like you who see this as a great source of pleasure and you know, where do you see this going, and what kind of message you want to get across in your film to reflect that?
I think we will, one way or another, have to face the fact that this kind of mass, almost cattle farming style winter tourism is coming to an end, as much as our leading leftist philosophers are saying that capitalism is coming to an end. It kind of feels the same way. It's this like end time of the way this was, these like grand resorts, all this money being spent, and just because I think either we're going to learn quickly enough now, or nature is going to teach us these lessons by itself, because it's just there's less and less snow, conditions are going to become less and less reliable, because climate change isn't just that it gets warmer, it's also that conflicting weather patterns, really drastic weather patterns increase. So you're going to have a lot more storms, which will lead to a lot more unstable snow conditions, which will lead to a lot more avalanche risks in the short term. And I think that's what I see in the future. And as somebody who comes from the mountain, what I see in the short-term future for this season, I really wouldn't want to be a mountain rescue guy for the coming season, because if they close down the resorts, and that's what it's looking like, a lot of people who don't have the proper training and equipment try to do backcountry touring, and I just see a lot of it. And I think that's
carry on.
No, I just think that's a short-term problem, but I think in the long term, that is actually where we're headed. I think that like people who really are serious about winter sports are going to have to redefine their relationship with the mountain and kind of maybe get ready to walk and hike for their descents and really find a symbiotic way of interexisting with this environment, because I don't think it's going to cooperate for very much longer.
It's a great thing about hindsight. You point it out in your film. I can't remember the exact quote about hindsight. Hindsight vision is 2020, and that's so prevalent now because we're in 2020, and hindsight is more important than ever before, because we look back and think we wish we could have done things differently. And so, tell me, why did you choose that? Because I feel as though, again, that taps into that macro narrative of hindsight with the environment as well, because we will look back to 2020. But we'll also look back over the last 10 years to say, what have we achieved as a people, and what damage have we done to the environment, and what can we change? But there is a point where things get too late. And you know, hindsight is a wonderful thing, and it's almost a perfect quote. Tell me a little bit about that, why you chose that particular sort of quote to focus the narrative around.
Yeah, I think that's actually that's the main payoff moment, right, of the film. It's kind of where it leads to. I think exactly what you're saying is the kind of the point I'm trying to say is also, okay, one, I want to use this moment in the film to look back on what I just told you. Also, to look back on the whole way Corona has been handled, but it's also exactly this kind of warning that hindsight is also the point where often you will recognize the one point or the one moment in time where you cross the line and you cross the point of no return. And thinking that way is just, there's this warning inherently implicit in it that says, do not make that mistake. Let's, like humanity, let's just not make the mistake of running past that point, really recognizing that in hindsight. Like the hindsight is absolutely worthless.
Yeah.
If it doesn't give you an impulse towards the future. If you don't learn from hindsight, and if you don't learn from the fact that, oh, looking back now, it's all crystal clear, because that's what it is, right? 2020 is this optical thing. It's an expression for perfect eyesight. It's like now it's all crystal clear. This is what we should have done. It's like you can learn from that and apply it to the future and be more accurate in how you make decisions based on the long-term future, 10, 20, 100 years from now.
Hindsight has to give you good foresight, right? You got to be able to use it to make change. And I think that's kind of been the narrative of this. This isn't, the thing I love about this film is that it's not just an observation of one incident in one ski resort. What you do is use a story to tell a wider narrative. And I think that as a filmmaker, that's very difficult to do. And I applaud you for doing such a fantastic job. At the end of the documentary, I didn't watch it and think necessarily of the case and the court case. It made me think about the wider environment and what we're doing to our planet. And it made me think a lot deeper than just a one incident in a ski resort. And I think that's fantastic, and it's a job well done. I want to just finish with one last question. You touched on it at various points within this Q&A, but what's the final message you want to give people? They've watched this documentary. There's a suggestion here that change needs to happen, and there's a recognition here that if we don't act soon, there will be something catastrophic. And I want you to give your final words of why you made this documentary and what you want to see this documentary achieve longer term.
I think really the point I wanted to make is don't use Ischgl as a laughing stock, the case of Ischgl, to point at something and be like, ha, look at how bad they did it. This is never the way we have done it. To kind of dissociate yourself from, but really recognize that that is how we as a system and as a society are running this world right now, exactly like the way the people are running the ski resort. And I can't tell everybody, I don't presume to tell everybody what these solutions are and what this meaningful action is, because I think that for everybody in everybody's own environment and in their context, it will be a different meaning. But if you can't take that mirror away from it, then I think I failed my point, is that it's more of a mirror for all of us than it is something to make us feel good about the fact that we weren't there, we didn't go to Ischgl, and that's why we're fine, and it's only these people who are the problem. I think that's the main issue I point out to make, is that we're all, in a way, the problem, and that's the first step to changing something, is to acknowledge your own mistake, I guess.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, I want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you for using Pause as a platform to showcase your work. To the audience out there, if you have questions for Simon or Alex, who was part of this film as well, feel free to post them on social media. We'll be sending out more details after this week and post questions, and they will get back to you. They'll respond to your questions, because there's a whole lot to digest here. And Simon, thank you so much for your time. Audiences, thank you so much for tuning in. There is still time to tip, so I would encourage you to give generously to Simon, to Alex, to these filmmakers who are doing great work and they can continue to do great work. We are giving 100% of all your tips back to the filmmaker for this one night. And thank you so much. Best of luck. And
thank you.
And hopefully we'll do this again soon. And best of luck with this documentary. I think it's amazing. We're very proud to have it at Pause. And thank you again.
Thank you, Rishi.
Take care.
You too, man.
Take care. Bye-bye.